Hello and welcome to Grow Conversations, your window into the world of medical cannabis. My name is Alex Fraser, and this is episode number one, the very first ever episode of this brand new podcast. And what we're doing here on Grow Conversations, we're very much trying to give insights and build awareness about medical cannabis and the industry as it's developing here in the United Kingdom. We're hoping to interview lots of fascinating people from all over the world of medical cannabis, from all around the globe, and to get their insights, put some faces behind some of the brands that you might be seeing opening up in this space, and a whole load of other great stuff alongside as well. So very excited to get started with our very first episode. And our guest today is Eric Bystrom, CEO of Cellen Therapeutics. Cellen are a UK producer of cannabis medicines, and very excited to hear a little bit from Eric. So Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks so much for inviting me to this. And first of all, huge congratulations for setting this up. I think it's a fantastic initiative. So very pleased to be here with you.
Thanks so much. Really happy to have you here. So perhaps just to start things off, you could tell us a little bit about your own sort of personal journey and how you came to be working in the cannabis industry.
Sure, of course. So I actually have a background in financial services, spent about 12, 13 years there. I had a bit of a life event, which basically meant that I had to, I considered a little bit, what I really wanted to do, and I wasn't really fulfilled in where I was. So I came across medical cannabis through a mutual contact, Benjamin Vieras de Lozano, who is my co-founder today. And for those of you that haven't met Ben, he's a very inspiring a doctor. And what's really interesting about Ben is that he's able to bridge that gap between sort of innovation and thinking differently and just being a very good, medical doctor. So we actually started looking at medical cannabis in the back end of 2018 when they rescheduled it to Schedule 2, and realized that there was just some big problems and hurdles still, particularly with patient access. Some of the definitions or some of the, the way that the NICE guidelines were written in particular, very quick calculation came to the conclusion that there's going to be very few specialist prescribers that can actually help patients access this. So we straight away knew that this was something that we could do something about, and really wanted to develop a UK domestic alternative for patients, so we aren't so reliant on imports and what have you. So that was our mission. So we spent the better part of 2019 really trying to figure out how to solve that particular problem. How can we actually add value to the industry, and looking at securing up a supply chain which allows us to serve the UK market. So that's how Cellen was born. I'm very pleased to say that we have gone live. We are providing medications to patients here in the UK. And yeah, we're super excited about what 2020 and beyond is going to hold for both us and for the industry.
Well, that's brilliant to hear. And it's great to hear that you're online and that patients are happily getting medicines in hand. I think that's something that I'm thoroughly enjoying watching sort of unfold as the industry grows and develops, and a fantastic addition to have producers working in the UK. So I think perhaps maybe you could tell us a little bit about, you mentioned your supply chains and how that works and how that's sort of perhaps different to other producers. So, so here at Grow Pharma, we work with a lot of producers from overseas. We obviously work with you guys at Cellen as well. And but there is something slightly different here that you're producing here in the UK. So perhaps you could tell us about how that works a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. So the big difference in what we're doing is that we are deploying a compounding model. So effectively what sets us slightly apart is, if you look at the rest of the UK market, it operates very much on an import distribute model, i.e., you'll have a prescription that's written, and that named prescription then has to go to the home office to apply for import. And typically then that will go to the exporting country, and then ultimately to the LP, who will then process that, that prescription. The problem with that model is often the lead time. This takes time. It can take 30 days or even longer, and we've had examples of where products just haven't been coming to UK patients quick enough.
Mm-hmm.
Our model works slightly differently in that we're actually manufacturing the final products in the UK. So typically, it takes us about 72 hours from receiving a prescription to being able to deliver that to patients.
Wow.
And that we can do because our supply chain is actually, it's fully European, so from seed all the way to manufacturing. But because we're also manufacturing under an MHRA licensed facility, it also allows for the MHRA and Department of Health to have full traceability of that whole supply chain and feel more comfortable in allowing us to bring in the products that way. The other thing we're able to do, which I think is very relevant, and we've seen some very early good feedback on this, is the concept around bespoke and personalized medications. Mm-hmm. So we're able to effectively manufacture any combination of CBD and THC, of course, up to a certain extent, to patients, depending on how on how they react to the medicines or what their underlying pathologies are. And we've seen some very good and early good feedback on that. So I think that's what sets Cellen apart a little bit from what you'll see in the typical sort of import distribution model.
No, that's brilliant. And anything that sort of closes that lead time between prescription written and product or medicine in the hand of patients is all good in my book. So fantastic work there. You mentioned in terms of sort of full supply chain is in Europe, so you're not growing in the UK, I imagine, at this point. Without wanting to urge you to give away any sort of future secrets for Cellen, I'm interested to know whether that is something that's sort of on your horizons. Are you looking to close that supply chain into just in the UK, or is it pretty much as it is now and will continue as is?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's a very relevant question. I think if you look at the cannabis a couple of years ago, everyone kind of went for the vertically integrated model, i.e. to try and, grow and do the extractions and then do the manufacturing and then ship it overseas and control that whole, supply or that vertical internally. We've actually taken a slightly different approach. So we're, as an early stage pharmaceutical, what we're actually focused on right now is at Cellen is ensuring that we have that our supply chain is robust enough to be able to support what we think is the growth that's coming in the UK market. So what we're fully focused on is that, right, to ensure that we have the right partners we're working with. And our supply chain currently is full EU GACP, EU GMP, EU GMP, all within Europe. And I think that's very important that we maintain that, at least so we can ensure that patients, because ultimately this comes down to patients being able to access the medicines. So we currently don't have any plans to work outside of those parameters. We're very comfortable in our ability of the supply chain to,
sure.
To produce and to reach those results. I think our bigger challenge is, collectively in the UK, ensuring that the number of patients increases in 2020 and 2021. You just have to look at the numbers to realize that the UK market has been much more cautious in its growth. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, that means that patients just aren't receiving the medications that they require, and there is an unmet clinical need. And unfortunately, to a large extent, that means that patients are having to go to the illicit market to a large extent. So that's our mission, and that's our core goal, is to provide that access, and that's where we'll be focused in the near term.
Brilliant. You mentioned a little bit, just previous question, that you were talking about your sort of bespoke methodologies in terms of being able to create different ratios. I think that's fantastic. I think that's something that is potentially, a big part of the future of medicine, is this sort of more bespoke, patient-orientated. So I mean, perhaps you can talk to us a little bit more about how that works in terms of perhaps how you respond to patients and what that then instigates in terms of production. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, absolutely, and I think it's a very relevant question. And maybe it's best explained by I'll take a couple of examples, maybe just to illustrate how this works. Mm-hmm. We all know that as an example, patients or children with severe forms of epilepsy, have had a real struggle to get medication, in the UK. one of the ways that has been available to them has been to travel, abroad to a destination in Europe, and to access medication through that route. But the problem is that those products are also standardized, and often that means you have to buy, a lot of 10 milliliter bottles in order to obtain the amount of dosing that these patients require.
Mm-hmm.
Our alternative is different. Our alternatives allows actually to bring the number of individual bottles down. We can make stronger concentrations. And this is based off of a lot of research that's been done with our sister company in Denmark, who partnered with a university called the Philadelphia Institute. And what that effectively allows us to do is two things. One is actually to provide the medication at a substantially cheaper cost, because we don't have that same overhead in manufacturing so many bottles. But it also tailors it, because now instead of having a cap to how much CBD concentration it is, we can increase that concentration or decrease as required. So that's one example of how it works, and where we've seen that there's been some success in this. The other important thing to remember is that the UK market has certain nuances which are very important to understand, right? One of them, as an example, is that we are still required to, or the legislation only allows us to prescribe for up to 28 days or 30 days for a particular patient, which means that it also provides a sort of cap into how much you can prescribe, or how big should the bottle sizes be, just as an example, right? And so there we can tailor it a lot more to that precise requirement for the UK market, so we can make formulations from products which are for 30-day period of use, not more, not less. So those are just two examples of how, this is working in practice and in the real world.
That's brilliant. And I think it's great that, and just to highlight there that you are looking at the UK and reacting very much to not just the patients here and their sort of situation, but the regulatory restrictions, or just the situation as it is, but still trying to make that work. And it sounds like you're having some real successes there. So fantastic stuff. You mentioned that you think the UK is slightly more cautious than perhaps other countries. I'm sure you're thinking Canada, Australia, perhaps Israel in the back of your head there. Do you know, or do you have your own sort of theory as to why you think that is? Why do you think the UK is perhaps more cautious than some of these other countries, particularly when it comes to cannabis?
It's a very interesting topic. I mean, I don't think there's one answer that can, or one answer that will summarize this. But what I will say, some observations, is if you particularly look at how cannabis has come about in North America and what the differences are from the UK, right? Mm-hmm. One of the main differences in the UK approach has been that, in the UK, if this is to be considered to be a medicine, we're having to go down the pharmaceutical route, right? Mm-hmm. And that means that when we treat this as a medication, we have to apply to the full suite of regulations that apply for pharmaceutical products. And that includes, not least that we have to produce and we have to cultivate the products in the right way. It has to be done under EU GMP. And also at the far end is we need to provide the evidence base, right? That is just the approach that the UK has taken, which is very different from North America, where it's more, come from a legalization of the recreational route to then kind of be used as a therapeutic. And those differences are so important to understand when you're trying to operate in the UK market. And that's why we have approached this very much as, we have to try and be as much as we can, a pharmaceutical company and apply and, all those standards that you would expect of a pharmaceutical company.
Yeah.
Now, which model is right or wrong, it's difficult to say, but it's just the reality of the market we're living in. And, what I would say as well, though, is, I know that there's a lot of debate on trying to provide quicker access. But one of the things that I think is important too is, as a result of having these pressures from the regulatory body in the NHS and what have you, we're also having to be a little bit smarter and think differently when it comes to developing a domestic UK market. And ultimately, our goal at Cellen, at least, is that we can provide that patient safety and access in a much, much better way than you would see from some of the producers elsewhere. And I'll just take an example to illustrate my point, which is we know, for example, that there's been products that have come into the UK which have a high variability in the contents that it actually has right? Which may be acceptable from a regulatory perspective in other jurisdictions, but that's not acceptable in a UK context. And therefore, we think that it provides, an opportunity for a domestic market to really, meet those standards and provide to not only the UK, but through the rest of Europe.
Fantastic. That all makes a lot of sense. I do want to get into, you were talking about developing that evidence base, and I certainly want to get into that in no short time. But I'm interested, just before we move away from the discussion around sort of bespoke medicines and how that works, sort of where you view the conversation around perhaps the entourage effect or the wider profile of different cannabinoids and terpenes in the plant and how that works. And there's a very sort of, I don't think it's divided, but I think there's two different sides to the spectrum, and you've got on one side THC and CBD isolates in combination, and on the other side you've got unprocessed flower perhaps, and everything in between. How do you think this is sort of the development of these medicines, particularly with the UK stance? How do you think that's going to move forward in relation to sort of that spectrum? And how does Cellen operate in that space with those sort of minor cannabinoids and terpenes?
Sure, and I think the starting point here again has to be patient experience, and that's my ultimate view on the topic, is that we shouldn't forget that medical cannabis is arguably the world's oldest medicine, and to the extent that patients are reporting that terpene profiles and the entourage effect and so on has a therapeutic benefit, I think we need to listen, and I think we owe it to patients to listen. The more difficult aspect then becomes, how do we translate that into real world scientific evidence, and how do we then harness that, reproduce it, and then be able to bring products to the marketplace. I think the state we're in today, just in general, is that there's still a wide variety and developing amount of different products and different choices for patients. And you're absolutely right to say that I think there's still a lot of debate on where you fall in that spectrum. Is it important, the entourage effect, or can you just operate with isolates, what have you? But I think right now, what's multiple thing is that just act products for patients, and doing so. We are collaborating with, and I think we'll talk about it in a little bit, Project 2021 as an example, where we start to actually just in a scientific way record and process all the data that will come out of this. And I think we'll see a lot more innovation when it comes to genetics and when it comes to how this, to grow these plants, and how do you do the extraction, and how do you keep them stable, and etc. So I think we're literally just on the tip of the iceberg, and there'll be a lot of development in this as the industry develops.
That's interesting. So it feels kind of like you're at a point where we have this good understanding of THC and CBD, and these things are being prescribed in the UK. And in terms of what's available, with Cellen, that's sort of the focus now, but that's absolutely not where you're cutting off limits there. You're going to be, reactive to perhaps as the data develops on that front, which makes perfect sense to me. I think that there's a long way to go on developing that data. And like you say, I was absolutely going to move on and talk about Project 2021. For those who don't know, I'll do a little sort of quick explanation. Project 2021 is an initiative set up by a company called Drug Science in the UK, and they're very focused on perhaps lobbying and also developing research data in the areas of cannabis and other drugs, psychedelics, as well as a big thing they're setting up at the moment. But the Project 2021 is very much a patient registry set up to gather patient data, essentially in return for subsidized medicines. I mean, perhaps you can give us more insight into how this works from your point of view, Eric, as a producer.
Absolutely. So I think you summarized it fairly well. I think, it's a fairly publicized and well-known, initiative led by Professor David Nutt and the team at Drug Sciences. But I think you've nailed the description in that, the main objective, of the project has ultimately been to provide access to patients. But by doing so, also create what will be Europe's single largest database to measure, the efficacy of the medicine, the safeties of the medicine. But there's a more sustainable and long-term goal in doing this, right? Which is, again, it comes back to the addressing some of those concerns about the lack of evidence in the UK. and the hope is ultimately that by doing such a large study, that we will ultimately be able to get the data we need so that this will become available on the NHS, and that is the ultimate goal. Mm-hmm. And from an LP perspective, and particularly being, in the UK, for us, this was pretty much a no-brainer to join. We think that the cause is very noble. It's what we have to do as an industry. We owe it again to the patient groups to do something of this magnitude. There have been challenges, of course, up to date from launching of the project. But what I would say is this: there's been some fantastic progress recently. The first thing we've been able to do quite well is we address the concept around sustainability of this. So, I think that there's previously been noises around, is it sustainable? Will we be able to have enough products for patients? Or this is just, and I think the answer now is we are actually set up for success. We have actually done a beta test. We've delivered products to patients. It works, right? It's live. And we've also been able to ensure that, it's a sustainable model also from a patient perspective. So what I mean by that is, yes, unfortunately, this is not on the NHS, but we've been able to bring, I think the price point down to something that will be at least equivalent to accessing it in the illicit black market. The second is, we've actually now assembled the single largest hub of prescribing clinicians. Right? There is no other place in the UK we can go with that many clinicians that are now being signed up to the project, and will start to gain that expertise in prescribing. And I think that's very important when it comes to access, because as we all know, the biggest bottleneck, I think, in the market today has been prescribers, right? And now by developing this collaborative approach, we're starting to unlock some of those bottlenecks. The clinical governance, I think, is something that has to be understood in this context as well, because, prior to, well, I would in fact claim even today, we just don't have the expertise in the UK of the prescribing activity. And so we do have to rely on our colleagues from, overseas. And, just by virtue of the collaborative nature of how drug sciences is set up, we're starting to see a lot of impact from doctors that are giving their input from Canada, from Israel, from Australia, and so on and so forth. So if you look at that governance structure that's now around it, we're starting to build a very robust framework for prescriptions to be able to take place. So, I think the future looks very bright when it comes to 2021. I think there'll be some exciting news coming out in the next couple of weeks. I don't want to, jump and preempt some of that, but this is definitely, I think, one of the most important initiatives in terms of opening up the market in the UK.
Brilliant. I can't wait to hear more about it. I've been following very closely and very, very excited to see that launch. Fantastic to hear the beta testing has been going well. Also fantastic to hear that there are clinicians signed up. And I think that for me is another, like, as you say, it is a bottleneck. It's that lack of expertise, lack of confidence perhaps from prescribers. And that comes from, a lack of education, and that's not coming from perhaps above, but it is happening anyway through organizations like Drug Science, Project 2021. So it's great to see that this is essentially an industry that's taking a grasp of the situation for the benefit of patients.
And Alex, if I may, I just want to add, because I think what we've suffered a little bit to date in the UK is that what we've affected on the prescriber side, at least, what we've had medical cannabis expert doctors, right? And I think we just need a mind shift where it should be we need to shift from that model to a model which is doctors who can prescribe medical cannabis. And what I mean by that is we need to integrate more into the existing system that is in place. And this is where I think Drug Sciences has done a good job, because now we're actually onboarding clinics which are not just medical cannabis clinics, but they are established clinical chains in the UK, and that will just help to disseminate this among the prescribing population.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, and I'm sure it's something we'll touch on in further episodes. And I'm absolutely hoping to have some sort of some representatives from you mentioned the cannabis specialist doctors working through these what are essentially cannabis clinics. It's the term I use, although I don't think they like it, but it's essentially what they are. And I think that they have certainly played a role in promoting the access that's available in the UK, and they have a place there. But I would totally agree with you that I think implementing these medicines into already established clinics and already established clinical settings, generally speaking, is definitely the way things are going to move forward. It's interesting, we're having conversations with a particular hospital trust about how this works. If a patient is hospitalized and they have a prescription, that hospital doesn't necessarily know anything about a vaporizer or any of the other stuff, how this works. So there's a lot of little bits and finicky stuff that you would never think of that you need to unpick to make sure that in every possible setting that patients are able to use their prescribed medicines, basically. So it all sounds fantastic, though. It sounds great, like what you're doing with Project 2021. We'll absolutely be updating people throughout as we release more episodes. We'll keep in everyone in the loop with the progress as it sort of unrolls. So great to hear. Another thing I do want to talk about a little bit is, obviously, Project 2021 is very much sort of patient-reported, real-world data, and obviously that has its place, and it's something that is becoming more and more prominent in sort of data gathering research circles. But obviously, there's this other conversation around randomized control trials and clinical data in that space. And I wonder if you guys at Cellen are particularly moving into that area at all just yet, or if that's something that's on the horizon.
It's something that so I think we're a little bit too early to be thinking around those lines. I think what the important thing to do is, and where we are certainly active, is to partner with research institutions over and above Project 2021. So, I think we need to also realize, and this is where the UK has such a unique position, in that we have such an established and and really a cluster of competencies for life sciences and biotech, right? And what we're actively doing at the moment at Cellen is looking for partnerships there to try and unlock some of the potential that exists. We just need to be able to unlock all that competency that exists with medical cannabis. And that's where today we're very active in seeking those types of partnerships, be that in various product delivery methods, be that in smaller scale studies in different pathologies. So there's there's some very interesting opportunities that we're looking at in that space, and I think that's where we're primarily focused. Randomized control training, that this won't go away. We're going to have to address this at one point as an industry. I think the challenge is, as we all know, the challenge with a lot of that is, how do you protect some of that IP that you would create in that, right? And how do you commercialize it, given the enormous costs that are involved in doing randomized control trials? But if we one day want to have a licensed product, which is something we're obviously also looking at, it might be a route that we eventually have to take. But it's a little bit early for us to be looking at that right now.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think I'm firing all of these questions at you about sort of what's on the horizon, what's the plans, and obviously with the COVID and that entire situation, a lot of these things have had to be put on hold. And I'm sure there are things that you would love to be announcing right now that you're now pushing back a little bit, and everyone's very much in the same boat there, pushing things back. And I guess that would be something interesting to sort of touch on briefly. I don't want to go on and on about lockdown or COVID or Corona or anything like that particularly, but it would be interesting to hear how lockdown, how all of this has affected you guys in terms of production, whether you've seen any difficulties there, or whether it's something that you've managed to avoid.
It's interesting. I think COVID has impacted us, I think, on 3 levels. The first is obviously that the CQC gave an exemption for clinics to be able to conduct video and remote consultations to patients, which I think is a big step change in the mentality of the CQC and what can effectively be a safe way to conduct consultations. So I think that was a positive impact in the sense that it's allowing for a shift in mentality when it comes to digital provision of care, right? As we've seen, the whole healthcare market has gone that way, and I think we can only continue to expect that goes. And why do I think that's important? Well, I think that's important because if we come back to one of the key challenges we talked about having such limited amount of prescribers and such a large set of the population that requires the medicine, technology can be a fantastic enabler if we can do it in the right way. So that's one of the sort of impacts. And this is what we're also seeing in Project 2021 is we can utilize technology now to sort of get a much broader reach. That's one. Number two is actually for us, we did notice that our ability to provide medicines within a very short time frame, so call that 72 hours, actually allowed us to provide medicines to patients who were still waiting for their products to arrive in the UK and had disruptions in the supply chain. Mm-hmm. So that's another impact we've seen, and that is something I don't think will go away anytime soon. I think the single most important thing I think for patients right now is just the access to supply. I can't stop emphasizing how important that is. And the third thing is actually that I think in certain pathologies, so for example, if we look at pain, a lot of those prescribing clinicians or a lot of those conversations we were having with prescribing clinicians have unfortunately been put on hold because they've been pulled back into the front line, and the clinical staff supporting them as well. So that's been one of the negative impacts that we've seen, is that there's just been a little bit of slowdown in the momentum that was going into the pandemic, that we were having a lot of promising conversations with particular pain specialists, but unfortunately that's been put a little bit on hold as we as the system tackles the pandemic crisis.
I mean, that follows with a lot of what I've sort of been following. I think you're right when you talk about there's been some issues with importation and sort of different elements of the supply chain. It sounds like the way you guys have set up is somewhat impervious to that, which is brilliant. Obviously, with things like this potentially not going away in the future. Obviously, touch wood, we're all very hopeful that no second waves and the rest. Hopefully, this won't come out and we'll have already had a second wave. So it won't be too long since we've recorded, but. Really interesting to hear how that's looking. And I could also totally agree. Access for patients is a big issue at the moment. I think a lot of that comes down to a lack of awareness, perhaps, or just a lack of. And you talked about a sort of prescriber understanding this, and as you say, COVID has perhaps delayed that. Physicians who are going to look into this have been brought back into the medical system to deal with COVID, and I've seen that all the way from, you talk about the pain specialists. I'm talking to a couple of nurses just yesterday who are looking to potentially work in this space, who have spent the last 3 or 4 months very much working on the front lines on COVID wards and dealing with that. So and I suppose if I'm going to take the time on this first episode, I just want to thank everyone for their hard work on the front lines during this whole time. And I think that's really worth saying, just as I sort of pass over this particular topic. So yeah, huge thanks to those guys. I'm sure that's something that you can reciprocate, and we all feel very much the same, especially from the point of view of working within the medical system and knowing how difficult that can be from the perspective of suppliers and producers like yourself. So brilliant. Well, it's been so lovely to talk to you today, Eric. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to touch on, or anything else you'd like to say, or anything else you want to ask before we round off the episode.
No, I mean, thanks, Alex. Again, just to reiterate, I think this is a fantastic initiative. And I think, I just, from our perspective at Cellen, at least, I just want to reiterate that, our bigger goal has to be as an industry is collaboration and working together, on this. I think, one of the things that we have as one of our core values is really to, work with institutions like yourselves and with others that are trying to do the right thing in the UK market. And I think it's the more we can collaborate and the more we can come together and really try and provide access to patients, the better. So again, congratulations on this. I think it's a great initiative, and thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much. There's some really lovely words there, and I couldn't agree more. I'm really hopeful that this series will be able to inspire some more collaboration, some more transparency, and as I say, provide some insights for those watching into this new industry as it develops. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear your insights, Eric. Thank you again for coming on the show. If anyone at home wants to learn a bit more about Cellen, they can go to cellenhealth.com. That's right, isn't it, Eric? I'm not getting that wrong.
That's correct.
Great.
That's right.
Cellenhealth.com. And of course, if you want to find out more about Grow, you can go to grow-pharma.com. And please stay tuned for the next episode. This has been the Grow Conversations podcast. Thank you again to Eric Bystrom from Cellen Health for coming online for our very first episode. And we hope to see you all next time. So thanks very much.